wave is threatening to fuel a massive spine wave border of France. Fire's already 4 times the size of Paris.
So what do you think? You heard it from the boss herself. Pack it up, it's time to take this workout outside. We've got a fully packed animal movement and primal workout planned, focusing on complete body strength, flexibility and endurance all in one. Just make sure to slap on some sunscreen and stay hydrated. Now, before we get started, we should loosen up a little bit, which means jumping around, tiny jumps, high jumps, it doesn't really matter as long as you stay as relaxed as possible. Swing your arms around a little bit, add some rotation to your hips, let gravity pull you down into the floor, and enjoy your body jiggling around in a somewhat relaxed fashion. Take a couple of very deep breaths. Let your shoulders hang loosely and fall into a relaxed position in your upper body. And we're gonna add some tiny rotations for our arms as well, shaking out the last bit of tightness surrounding our shoulders before we get into the workout itself. Starting out by mobilizing our entire spine by simply letting gravity pull us deeper and deeper into a posterior chain stretch, and then reversing by actively flexing every single muscle in our posterior chain until we are fully upright again, opening up our chest the tiniest bit before we move into the next repetition. Breathing in deeply when moving down all the way, shoulders relaxed, arms extended, legs extended, and then breathing out all the way while we are elevating and opening up our chest. Going for a third and final repetition, and this time I want you to actively flex your core musculature and pull your upper body down with your own strength, flexing your hip flexors as well, bending all the way in your hips, and then actively flex your glutes as hard as you can while you're extending your hips once more. Now adding circular movements for spinal rotation, focusing a lot on lumbar spinal movement. So we're always taking a full circle from one side to the other, and we're always actively pulling our upper body as closely to one leg before we move parallel to the floor and up the other side, meaning we're not just loosely hanging around, even though it might look so. We're always actively using our musculature to pull our upper body down, to pull it to the side, and to pull it up all the way with our glutes flexed completely in the extension in our hips, and then our abs and hip flexors flexed completely when we are bent in our hips, activating every single muscle surrounding our hips and our lower back before we get into the exercises. And since we have a lot of bendy exercises in our legs, it is important to mobilize our knees and ankles as well, which we're gonna do by adding simple deep squats, which means we want to sit down as far as we can with our feet still staying flat on the floor. Now, if your heels raise, don't worry about it. Over time, your ankle mobility should improve and you should be able to sit down all the way. And always at the top of the movement, opening up our chest and shoulders the tiniest bit, and try to stay as relaxed as you can in all of those movement patterns. Sure, we do need some strength and some activation from our muscles to sit down and get back up, but we want to stay as relaxed as possible, which is going to help us immensely when it comes to the flexibility aspect of this entire workout. Always full range of motion, full relaxation. Hands to the floor from a standing position, bring your knees to your arms, lengthen your shoulders, stand back up, and then we're gonna switch directions, adding rotation in our hip and spine by moving once to the left, getting back all the way, and then once we are down, moving to the right side before we get into our starting position, and then working back to the middle, now adding a lot of arm, shoulder, core, and hip strength while moving into the tiniest bit of lumbar and hip rotation, activating the muscles surrounding our lower back and our hips with every single movement, and of course every single switch of directions. And a bit of a bonus, if you can, always stay in complete scapular abduction, pulling your shoulder blades apart and lengthening your shoulders while you are pulling your knees all the way towards your extended arms. This way we can add a lot more chest and trap activation as well during those exercises. With our next starting position, having our hands already on the floor, keeping them there, and then we're gonna go through nice circular movements from a deep squat, knees to your arms, full extension in arms and legs as well as back before we move all the way down into a deep squat. From there, knees to your arms, extend your leg, push your hips back, sit back down into a deep squat, and this is going to actively work your entire joint system from your ankles to your knees to your hips to your shoulders, your elbows, and help us loosen up our spine as well. This one's an amazing combination of posterior chain flexibility and anterior chain strength, requiring massive amounts of strength from your core and hip flexors to go through this in a proper fashion. From a deep squat, placing one hand behind your foot, extend one leg, activate your core, and switch directions. From this deep squat position, we're going to have a lot of activation in our obliques, so the side of our abdominal musculature, and massive activation from our hip flexors, quads, and frontal abdominals. So basically our entire anterior chain moving all the way up to our chest. To hold this position low, extend our leg, keep our arm extended as well, so a tiny bit of shoulder activation as well as a slight bonus. Once again, a great exercise when it comes to this deep squat capability for ankle, knee, and hip mobility. And between exercises, we're sometimes going to just extend and loosen up by switching sides. A little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. Stay as relaxed as you can. Take a deep breath in. And get back into the deep squat as a starting position, because we're going to do the same thing just with the leg extended behind the other one. And this will, while having almost all the same benefits we've had with the exercise before, is now going to add a lot of adductor strength requirements, so the inside of your thighs, as well as a lot more core activation and now even more hip mobility than we had with the version before this one. If possible, pulling nice arches with our arms above our head from the left side to the right side, keeping our support arm extended and completely extending the leg we are crossing behind the other one. Before we once again reverse into a deep squat, extend our legs and loosen up a tiny bit by moving into this pike-like stretch position for our posterior chain, while adding the tiniest bit of rotation, pulling our upper body from one leg towards the other, just a handful of times before we squat back down, because now we have our very first crawling or animal style pattern, a frontal ape-like crawling movement. And here we want to actively drive our hips down towards the floor, keeping them below our shoulders, which is going to massively increase the hip flexor activation we require in this exercise. A lot more quad activation as well. And now we have this unilateral movement pattern that adds a lot of coordination requirements, because we're always moving left hand with right foot, right hand with left foot, so we're crossing over, and our knees stay as close to the floor as we can before we switch feet. And switching directions for even more strength requirements in the backwards movement, before we once again extend our legs, move to the left, move to the right, take a deep breath in, and slowly lower down into a squat once again for our second crawling exercise, a frontal gorilla walk, which means that now our hips are above our shoulders, even if it's just the tiniest bit. This way we can add a little bit more posterior chain flexibility when it comes to the upper insertions of our hamstrings surrounding our glutes, while shifting the strength requirements from our legs a little bit more forward towards our arms and shoulders, because our weight is shifted more upwards. Working on either your fists or open palms, depending on what is more comfortable for you and if you feel any sort of pain in your wrists or arms in general. Also, as always, working forward and backwards so we get as much benefits when it comes to coordination as we can. And this time we're going to relax in a deep squat, adding a tiny bit of rotation for our hips, just once or twice, deep breath in before we move to the next exercise. with our first lateral crawling pattern, adding even more hip mobility, even more knee and ankle mobility, switching directions, of course. And here we are once again actively trying to push our hips down towards the floor so we can increase those hip mobility benefits as much as possible. Now, your back does not have to be completely upright and completely extended, but if you can, just extend your lower back the tiniest bit. This will go a long way in helping us open up our hips even more while adding a lot more core strength requirement to this movement pattern. And is also a perfect exercise for those of you who like to squat with heavy weights to warm up all your lower body muscles and joints before you get into those heavy squat sets. And once again, here only loosening up in a deep squat position before we now switch directions for our next crawling pattern. Extending our legs completely, hands on the floor, the giraffe walk. An absolutely amazing exercise, not just when it comes to posterior chain strength, lengthening basically every single muscle in our backside, but also a lot when it comes to hip flexor strength, because we're always pulling those extended legs towards our wrists, which requires a lot of hip flexor strength and a lot of quad strength also to get that extended leg as close to our arms as we can, while the backwards movement focuses a little bit more on glute, shoulder and arm strength. If you cannot extend your legs fully, don't worry about it. Just like with any of the other exercises, as you progress through those workouts again and again, this will improve. For now, if you have to bend your legs, that is absolutely okay. As long as you're feeling a good stretch in your posterior chain, you're doing everything correctly. Back into a deep squat for our next movement pattern, what I like to call the long lateral ape, this time extending one leg and moving all the way towards the other side, extending the other leg before we switch directions. This way we open up our adductors and hips even more, adding a lot more stretches to the insides of our thighs and switching with our hips actively pushed towards the floor. If you experience any sort of pain in your knees because we have a little bit of rotation in those movements, dial it back a little bit, shorten the movement pattern, and over time, as you progress, try extending those legs completely while making sure that you're actively pushing your hips towards the floor when switching directions and to stay somewhat upright in your upper body. And now our entire leg and core musculature is always involved in stabilizing our body throughout the movement pattern. Now switching to a bear starting position, meaning shoulders and hips at the same height. It doesn't have to be exact, but as close as you can get it. And now we're moving with a lateral bear crawl. Hands alternating left with right, right with left, always staying with our upper body somewhat parallel to the floor. And this time we have pretty much equal weight distribution, arms and legs working simultaneously. I feel like this is one of the more relaxed, easier to manage lateral movement patterns. So if you're struggling a lot with the sideways ape-like patterns where our hips are very low and we have a lot of stress on our hip joints and knees, try this with your hips elevated a little bit more, and as you progress, try and bring your upper body into an upright position and your hips closer to the floor with the ape-like movements. And since we have been close to the floor all this time, now it is once again time to extend our legs from a deep squat position once more to loosen up our posterior chain and lumbar spine before we move into the next movement pattern. Deep squat. Starting position, hips as close to the floor as we can, into the frog leap, where we always extend our arms completely and try to bring our feet at the very least to hand height. And when jumping back, placing our hands behind our feet for a longer movement pattern. And this is going to require a lot of hip strength and a lot of core strength, helping us force our hips deeper into those squatting position, which means we're actively opening up our adductors once more, and due to the tiny rotation in our hips externally, also adding massive activation in our glutes, specifically our gluteus medius, or the outside of our butts. Not just a very practical movement pattern, but also a very fun one to go through. Once again, back into extensions, loosening up, swing left side, right side, just for a handful of seconds. Deep breath in. And back into our squatting starting position, our upper body now completely upright, hands behind our head. We're going to go through the duck walk, always bringing one knee as close to the floor as we can through each step, and of course reversing into both directions, with the forward walk being a lot easier actually than the backwards walk. So if you're struggling with moving backwards, you can just work on the frontal duck walk for now, with this one adding a lot of quad strength to the hip flexor and glute strength, and also a lot of calf strength, and what is very uncommon in most of these exercises, tibialis strength, or the front side of your lower leg musculature. This being an exercise that most martial artists have probably had to do for a long period of time, especially if you've been to any sort of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym, because it is definitely also an amazing mobility and strengthening exercise for our lower body and our core. Hands to the front, extending our legs, switching upper body positions from the left side to the right side, staying loose and relaxed and breathing deeply. Because we're gonna switch it up with our next exercise. From a squatting position, we're gonna place our hands behind our upper body for a crab walk, which is going to activate our posterior chain a lot more, even if we're not pushing our hips up. Focus on keeping your arms extended and moving left with right, as well as right with left. Once again, as usual, unilateral movement pattern. And since this one can add a lot of stress on your shoulders because we are lengthening our anterior delts and our pecs the tiniest bit, try it out a handful of times, moving just one step forward, one step backwards, just to make sure that there is no problems in your joints before you go through this for longer and longer stretches. Combining posterior chain strength in our glutes and our spinal erectors with anterior chain strength, our frontal abdominals, as well as our hip flexors. And we have a lot of oblique activation as well, because we have those tiny bends laterally in our spine as we move through each single step. And once again, extending our legs and swinging sideways just for a handful of seconds. One more deep breath in before we get back into a deep squat position for an alligator crawl, which means that we are rotating internally in our shoulders by moving our elbows to the outside, pointing our fingertips inwards, opening up our knees sideways, while keeping our arms bent, now requiring a lot more strength from our upper body, especially if our hips stay at shoulder heights or slightly above. And we are never truly extending any of our appendages, so we're staying in this shortened position in our entire body while activating our core as hard as we can, with the alligator crawl being a precursor to our next exercise, because it does require a little bit less strength and mobility. And once again, we're going to go back into our starting position, extend our legs, and move sideways, left to right. One more deep breath in, all the way out, and back into our final crawling pattern, which will be the lizard crawl. Now staying as close to the floor with our upper body as we can and extending our legs for longer and longer steps, requiring massive amounts of lower body strength when moving forward and massive amounts of upper body strength when moving backwards, making sure to twist our spine and our hips as much as we can through every single step. And then, as we've gotten used to extending our legs, swinging left side to right side, breathing deeply, and moving into our final exercise, because we're gonna end things the same way we started them, loosening up by jumping around, staying as relaxed as we can in our body, adding some rotations to our hips. Jump high, jump low, jump in slow motion, jump quickly, as long as you're staying completely relaxed and jiggling your entire body, taking deep breaths and trying to relax again. Start bringing your pulse down to a somewhat normal range. If you like the video, and come on, subscribe, join us. We do stuff like that very regularly, which means I'll probably see you soon. So until then, have a good one. Captain Cairo. Peace out.